Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Let's face it, folks. There's a gap between leadership and employees, and that rift is growing wider by the day. Sure, there are plenty of experts and pundits out there offering advice, but a lot of their so-called helpful content boils down to buzzwords and good intentions. At Sapient Insights Group, we think you deserve something a bit more impactful. Introducing Closing the Leadership Gap, a special 3-webinar series aimed at helping you, your teams, and your organization as a whole to better understand the root cause of the workplace challenges you're facing today. More importantly, this free event will give you practical, meaningful steps to begin turning the tide. Want to learn more? Visit sapientinsights.com/lead-now.
Welcome to Spilling the Tea on HR Tech, where we focus on the hottest HR tech news everyone needs to know to be in the know. We break down the news of the week and help you make sense of what it means for our industry and how it could impact your organization. We're recording today on April 2nd, 2024, so we're past April Fool's Days, everyone. You don't have to worry. I have not allowed Cliff to throw in any jokes in this week, and we're going to bring you all the news you can use this week. I'm Stacey Harris, your Chief Research Officer and Managing Partner for Sapient Insights Group, and your host today. And joining me today again is my co-host, Cliff Stevenson, Director of Research and Principal Analyst for Sapient Insights Group. Cliff, welcome to the conversation. So much sort of weird tea going on today. I'm like, it's an interesting
overabundance. If there was a prank, it was how many articles that you highlighted that we found together to talk about this time. Really deep, interesting conversations, along with our standard going over some of the new industry news.
Yeah, lots of updates, lots of new things. But I think because it was a little bit of, because the holidays, a lot of people are on spring break, a lot of people are sort of moving around, lots of deeper thinking article conversations this week, but a little bit of industry news, like you said, right?
Yeah. We've got some acquisitions, we got some expansions, and really one sort of, I think we'll find as we talk about this, some recurring themes. But one thing I noticed is that we're really seeing topics that we've discussed on this podcast that we as an HR community have talked about for a long time coming to the forefront of the public discourse. And I'd love to see it. And of course, we're going to be talking AI, right?
It's there.
2024.
Definitely going to be in the conversation. Before we dive into the conversation about AI and all the other things going on in HR tech space, we should probably let everybody know where we're going to be at in the next couple of weeks. I know both of you and I are going to be now traveling. So you've recently signed up for a couple of events. I know I've been planning to do some events in the upcoming. So let's just kind of walk through where everybody can see us, catch us over the next couple of weeks. And if you just got done with 2 webinars that people could sort of go online and find, correct, right?
That's right. IREM, we did a recap of your wonderful keynote from HR Tech for those that didn't get a chance to see it, and plus with any updates and of course more of a discussion on AI. That will be available on the IREM website. There was another one that was public. Still don't know if it's going to be posted, and that was from Cornerstone talking about learning content, which we do have a paper available that you can find. So if you Google learning content strategy, I'll also put it in the show notes, you can find that. But that was a webinar discussing that, which was extremely well attended. Over 560 people signed up. So clearly some topics in there that people really wanted to talk about.
And I think you guys were having some conversations that included the Cornerstone's recent acquisition or decision to make an acquisition of Tailspin, which is their augmented reality solution. So you guys had some of that conversation on there too, didn't you?
That's right. In fact, we had someone from that group that was able to talk about how it would be integrated in. And it was just a nice synergy of what was happening at the time, because this wasn't planned that we would do it this way. But when we're talking about learning content and ways to bring in different types of learners, okay, now we've got AR and augmented reality and virtual reality that can be another way that they can use their capabilities and some of their AI to convert existing content into these new formats for those type of learners in those sort of specialized environments.
That's an area where I'm actually kind of excited to see AI do its work, is this augmented reality, simulated environments, those kind of things. Because I do think anytime you can make it safer and more capable of people sort of doing training in environments that are more like what they're going to be working in, the better. So that's a piece I'm excited about. I was also at the PlanSource Customer Advisory Board just 2 weeks ago. I think our last recording we did right after I attended that. That was really exciting. We were talking about the future of benefits and where that market is heading. The Customer Advisory Board was really powerfully attended with a lot of, I think, CHROs and total rewards professionals who had good questions. I mean, there are some topics I think we sometimes, because they're analysts and talk a lot about this stuff, feel like it's been put to bed, but things like hybrid work environments is still a conversation. People are still working on sort of having those conversations with their CEOs and executives about work from home or not work from home. The other things that we heard a lot about was the increasing cost of benefits. We're going to have a little bit of a conversation about that today and how some organizations are tackling that. But also just how do I aggregate this view of sort of direct benefits along with the sort of broader benefits of working in an organization like development or international opportunities or things that are not as sort of traditionally sort of built into a total rewards sort of statement, but are now becoming really critical to this generation of workers, as they have been for years, but I think even more so in the last couple of years. So yeah, and then going forward, I think both you and I will be at events. So over the next 3 weeks, I will be going from the Kentucky Derby. So I'm going to be at Derby Day for the first time in my life. I've never done that. I will bring you guys lots of updates in a few weeks. That's May 4th. Going there for a customer event that we're doing. And there may or may not be some pictures of hats, is what I'm understanding.
There will absolutely be pictures of hats.
I know. And then right after that, I'm heading out to Cornerstone's doing a customer advisory group as well and a customer event in Chicago. So I'll be speaking and attending that event. And then I'll be heading out from there that's in May, sorry. In April, before that, I'll be at the Workday Innovation Summit and at the Oracle Innovation Summit, both in the Bay Area. So I'm going to be at a couple different places throughout the next couple of weeks. But how about you, Cliff? You said you're also going to be in April traveling, right?
That's right. The 15th through the 17th, April 15th through 17th, I'll be in Austin. It's not as far as San Francisco and Bay Area, but that East Coast of Texas. I'll be there in Austin for Work Human. And then the following Monday through Wednesday, I'll be in Miami for Workforce Software's Ignite conference, Vision Ignite. So Miami or Austin in the middle and end of April. If anyone's around, reach me, Cliff at sapientinsights.com. Let's meet up.
Yeah. And at the same time, there'll be a lot of events that we're going to be missing. I try really hard not to do FOMO, but when you got 2 events, you got to make decisions. But there will be the Unleash US event in Las Vegas. There will be the new Epic event that Mark Stelzner is running for HR Executive Magazine coming up. There is also an I Am Phenom sort of analyst event that we will not be able to attend, but I know that they're going to be doing their event. And we also know that WalkMe, which is an adoption platform tool, which is really well known in the learning space and got quite a few high ratings in our research over the last couple of years. We'll be doing an event up in New York that we're not able to attend because of the conflicts. But yeah, it's a busy event. I know a lot of people just got back from a couple other events earlier in the year. So not only do we have a lot of news, but there's a lot of traveling going on right now, right?
There is. It's that season. For those of you that work in the industry, I'm sure you know that there's quite a lot of movement happening. We've also got, some movement from companies as well, though. One of the big stories is that we have another acquisition, another story from Deel, newer company, been around less than 5 years, and they've showed up my radar a few times now. And the story is that they've acquired Zavvy, Zavvy. They're out of Munich, doing people enablement there. And at the same time, Deel announced that while they had previously done a freemium model, free for certain aspects of HR for up to 200 users per company, now it's any size company can join in that freemium model if they'd like. And I know that, Stacey, you did quite a bit of research. You've been really interested in Deel and their history and their story. Pretty fascinating stuff and pretty relevant to some of the things we're seeing in the job market too, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have said for a while that the payroll core HR space is a little ripe for some new
Mhm.
entrants who are going to come in and probably shake things up a little bit. We talked last week about Helios. We're talking this week a little bit about Deel. We know we've had quite a few conversations about what's going on with Rippling. A lot of new organizations coming into this market and sort of doing things a little differently. I think Deel is one of those organizations that we're seeing started by two students at MIT who were struggling, which I thought was an interesting, as in the US or in other countries, sort of, they were struggling to get hired by organizations that wanted to hire them because of immigration status. And so they set out to create an HR technology that would make that a bit easier. So they start out with some employer of record capabilities. They've got contractors capabilities, immigration status capabilities, some of those things that we don't see in a lot of the traditional HR systems. And in many cases, they're careful about how to separate that from a legal requirement perspective. And this time that's more of a services conversation, but we all know that even with services, I need someplace where I can track all the information. And that seems to be sort of the approach they've taken. And then, as you noted, they had a freemium model. They've added a payroll component. They've added the sort of broader talent now with what they're doing with Zavvy. They've had the core HRMS. And so they say online they've got 20,000 customers. I will say we haven't done a briefing with them yet. They're on our list. We're hoping to get a briefing with them in the next month or so. That I'm sure is part of their freemium model. So it's something to be aware of. But still, a lot of people who have signed up to leverage that technology. And I do think we're seeing more and more companies rethink the idea of where their workforce is and can be. COVID was definitely a great opportunity to think about where people could work. Now the next conversation that's coming down the pike is, can I have people who are living in different regions, in different countries, in different locations as well, that are going to be add value to my organization and really help me with the skills battle that we have going on. So yeah, I think Deel's one to watch just as much as some of the other ones. And I think it's going to be interesting to see where they take this, right?
Absolutely. And I love that you mentioned their story about, having trouble getting hired. Certainly anyone that's hired in the United States, and really I've seen this in Europe as well, it can be difficult to hire people due to immigration restrictions and things like that. And along that sort of hiring front, we saw that Career Circle getting hired is now getting hired powered by Career Circle, as you see it on there. And that's pretty interesting because they fall under and I'm assuming this is pronounced Allegis Group, but anyone from that company, feel free to correct my pronunciation on that, which has for a long time been expanding their platform. So you may know Randstad or Manpower, or Deco. Allegis is literally the fourth of that group, right? They're the next biggest. And what they had done is add on all of these different industry specific. Aerotech is one that jumped out to me. But with Career Circle and with getting hired, they now have the ability to focus on underrepresented communities. And that could be anyone like people with disabilities, veterans, people of color. And that's really interesting to me that they're sort of thinking differently about how to expand their portfolio of different people to get hired. It's not just engineering or aeronautics. So now they're saying, okay, regardless, we need to be able to hire people from these communities. And that's very interesting to me.
Yeah, this I think is a very targeted approach to the diversity, the broader diversity conversation that's happening in the market right now. We also know that, kind of on a sad note here in the United States, that they just closed down sort of the Department of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Belonging in our government and the US government. That was kind of a sad note. What is nice to see, I think, is that many of the organizations who support the recruitment and the hiring processes around the world are picking up some of these mantras and really taking this as an opportunity to say, look, the best talent is found in places you oftentimes are not looking, right? And in many cases are overlooking because of your biases or because of your experiences. And so I'm happy to see this. And I think it'll be interesting to watch what Allegis continues to do as they grow this way and they expand in their capabilities, right?
Absolutely. And then here's a bit of, if we're talking piping hot tea, this is right off of the whistles blowing out of the kettle, right? This came in right as we were about to record, but Alight just announced their latest release of Alight Work Life. And so that is adding in more AI capabilities, and we're going to be talking more AI, but adding in a more robust AI engine, better integration, and you mentioned some of the ability to provide these benefits and expanding that for all different types of companies. That's what we're seeing now. So really finding better integrations and finding probably better reporting as well for how financial and well-being capabilities, for instance, could be added in to the portfolio of benefits and how they can be tracked and how you can measure their impact through these AI tools.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is great to see. I'm laughing at how positive you were about this because Cliff was like, "Oh my gosh, another one came in right for getting ready to get started." Just to be real honest, guys, let's be human for a moment, because we put together a list of things we're going to talk about, and then the minute we say, "Okay, we're done," something else comes in.
Mm-hmm.
But this was a topic I felt was important because, again, I had just come out of the event over at PlanSource with their customer advisory board. We know that there's been a lot of conversation about the safe application of AI in particularly a space that's very sensitive, like benefits, and what benefits people are using and how they're using them. And so I do think we're seeing in this particular case, the AI powered support is they're releasing what they're calling Lumen AI is what it is. It's got a trademark on it. So they're definitely thinking that name is going to stick. It's an AI engine, as they say, that enhances more kind of like the virtual assistant chatbot conversation, right? With personalized content and messaging and targeted models and all that stuff. So I think this is good to see. I do think that, in the benefit space, it is a place where you want to make sure your answers are absolutely correct. My bet would be, and again, we haven't talked to the team, that they have done a lot of work mapping the answers to the questions in this particular case, making sure we're not going to see some of the things that are happening in the other sort of open world chatbots, which are hallucinations, those kind of things. But I do think that, the one thing that you and I've talked about is you really have one chance to get it right with your employees when it comes to something like a Q&A question answer chatbot environment, right? The minute it tells you the wrong information. I want to say Susan Lucas, maybe, I'm not sure if it was her, Evil HR lady, might have been our friend Heather Busing, who put out an article on the New York Times chatbot AI assistant that is giving out bad HR responses, like truly wrong HR responses, and how dangerous that is, right? It's, you just got to really be careful about these things. So I'm assuming Light's done all of its background check and its work on this. But I do think I'm watching to see which organizations are kind of slowly rolling into this in a way that they're opening up the black box. They're showing out how these algorithms are working. They're talking about what's real AI versus what's just built on top of things. They're also talking about, from a Light, they're adding more financial and well-being empowerment inside of their program now, which I think is a really important component that we don't talk enough about. It's a big part for people. They're also adding more what they're calling comprehensive benefit management, which means they're going to be tracking things like the whole life and long-term care, leave management, expanded healthcare navigation, some of that kind of stuff, which seems a little bit more mundane in the face of AI. But to me, right now, it's probably more important to the people who are using the tools. So,
yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the trust thing. That is something that I recall from the days of predictive HR analytics, when that was sort of the big news. That was would have been the substitute for AI now, where it's like you're always going to need to mention them. And that was the same idea, that you can't be incorrect in your judgments or in your predictions, or no one's going to listen to you again, right? It's the old proverb I think I've mentioned on here before, that trust arrives on foot and flees on horseback. It takes a really long time to rebuild that. So yeah, it's important to get it right, but it's also why it's important to use that in, as you said, in these environments where there's a little less risk, rather than giving bad advice. And then, as I mentioned before, there was a few stories that came out that to me were interesting because they were bringing to a broader audience, and just in general, bigger audience, things that we talk about here quite a bit. One was the World Economic Forum, working together with PwC, with PricewaterhouseCoopers, put out a 46-page report called Putting Skills First. So really talking about the important, this idea of, they call it a cultural shift to a skills-first approach, which is interesting because it is something that I think we've seen for quite some time. In fact, you and I did a webinar together talking about both learning and skills not that long ago, when we obviously have it in our much longer report and much better. But still, it was really cool to see this sort of thing being brought up in a space as big as the World Economic Forum. They pointed out some big things, the need for identifying gaps, how to sort of deliver more personalized training, boosting lifelong learning. And then you sort of pointed out, Stacey, that, okay, that's great, but do they actually show you how to do it besides just saying this is what you need to do?
Yeah.
And also I want to thank David Green, who posted this and was able to provide a nice summary, because I'll admit I didn't read all 46 pages.
Yeah. And David does a great job of, I think, highlighting, if you don't follow David Green, some of the better sort of data sets and content in the analytics and planning space, as well as I think some of the stuff that's really coming across the board when it comes to some of the sort of the tangential topics like skills management, which is part of how I track and analyze and do workforce planning for my companies. I think the thing that we're seeing a lot of reports come out on skills. Let's just be really blunt here. If you haven't listened to any of my presentations over the last year, I'm just going to be very, very open with you. It feels like we're doing a lot of layoffs right now. It feels like things are like slowing down. So like, why are skills all of a sudden so important? Honestly, we don't have enough people to do the work that's coming down the pike. Just sheer numbers. I've said this before, but on average, we had 5 people working for every non-working person in the US in just 2001, 2002. Today, we're at like 4.5. Within the next 5 years, that's going to be 2 people working for every person who is not working in the United States. That's already the average is like 2.3 in Europe. So just be aware that we're in an environment where no matter what's happening kind of at the moment from an economics perspective, that we just need more people to support all the services and the businesses and the work that needs to be done for all the human beings that are in the world that we're supporting, right? So that's a challenge that we're going to face. And skills is part of that conversation. And there are particularly certain positions and roles in the market where that's a bigger issue than some others. What I think they've done in this report is they did do a lot of case studies. So it was a couple of front pages on sort of what they were seeing that you should be doing, which is filling the skills gaps, those kind of things. And then the rest of it was just a series of case studies, both in the business side as well as the education and government side. I think case studies are great in this space. It's all what we call promising practices. We don't know what's going to stick or not stick. We've been talking about skills and competencies for years. But I do think that, I would caution everyone as they're moving into this space that whatever you do, remember skills management it's not a once and done project. It has to be maintained. And whatever you do, you have to build something that is manageable. And this is where AI can help a lot. Mm-hmm. But I do think that it's a long road. I think every organization that's going down it that doesn't invest in it with that vision will have a challenge from what we're seeing in our data, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you mentioned as well that with all of these people working, obviously, yes, we're going to need to augment them through AI, but also, we start to think more and more about the effect on the people who are working at this time, which is what kind of brings up something else that popped up. And this was from Forbes. And This is just not a headline I thought I'd ever see from them, which was why human capital metrics could be just as important as financial returns, and sort of making a more philosophical case for, do we need to think more about not just how to be more efficient with our people, right? How to get the most out of that 2 people for every 1 not working, but also what is work like for them? How does it affect them? And not just in terms of how can we get the most from them for shareholder returns, but also what is the environment we want to create for our children, for our future? It's a broad conversation that I think, honestly, we started having again during the pandemic more, and we started having more visibility to topics. You mentioned mental wellness before, and these sort of ideas and stress and burnout that we just didn't used to talk about so openly before. And now looking at these sort of metrics whereas it used to get some pushback from this sort of broader business community, now we're saying, no, the Forbes is going, maybe we should be looking at this as just as important as the financial returns. I find that fascinating and a welcome change, honestly.
Yeah, I don't think I have much more to say. I mean, these kind of articles you see, and I think part of what's driving this is that the investors themselves are looking for companies that they can trust, that they feel comfortable about the brands. And so I think this is a bit of the investors themselves doing some changes, right? Because I think the stockholders are saying, I want to be, associated with a business that has more alignment. But I think the other part of this is just financially, when you just look at the metrics, long-term metrics, not short-term, long-term, the investment in people always pays out better, right? The problem is that a lot of times our businesses are judged off of short-term, especially if they're public, stock prices. And so I do think that what we're going to have to see to sort of change this thinking even more so is a difference between the value of a company at a short-term basis and the value of what they could be in the long-term basis, right?
Yeah, and exactly that. I do. Yeah, I don't want to point out that Forbes is not turned into some sort of leftist
Altruistic, yeah.
publication just doing it for that, because they are saying that this is a form of future-proofing your business, and there are financial benefits to that. But they are saying it's a more of a long-term approach, and there's certainly nothing wrong with being ethical and profitable. So, yeah, and then, kind of speaking on that side, this was a pretty interesting article that came in, and you had mentioned the rewards before, but this was just kind of, and I think this will lead nicely into an AI conversation. I'll tell you why. So this was a company called Blueboard. They were talking about how the employee recognition platform has shut down, and kind of just telling the story of how it really affected everyone. And when you see these sort of things happening, it just can have a bigger effect on people, right? And so they mentioned that this is the first closure of rewards platform in 2024, but we may see some of these smaller vendors going. And when that happens, right, whatever it is that they provided to your employees is now gone, right? It's not like you have a backup system in place. And the effect that can have on employees is often overlooked because, it's sort of just like the metrics we were just talking about. There's real tangible effects that these things can have, whether it might be anything from recognition, which sometimes we forget about the impact that can have, or it could be, a mental wellness app or something like that that's provided by a smaller vendor and then goes away. So, some of it is a sort of cautionary tale, but also I think there was some practical advice here on planning ahead and communicating and letting people know about what tend to be sort of sudden events when they happen in this world that we live in.
Yeah. And this one I think it's a bit scary. I mean, we've seen payroll companies go through this, right? There are times when this kind of thing that a bit of the challenge with SaaS environments, one of the big reasons back in the early days that people didn't want to move there was that what happens if that business doesn't, fails, right? So I think one of the things every buyer should do is look at the financial wellness of any organization that they are investing larger amounts or even their employees' monies into, right? At any level, right? We did see a couple of organizations come out when this announcement came out saying that they were going to offer relief funds. I think Salt Labs, who is another sort of rewards recognition program that Cliff and I had talked to at the HR Tech conference, run by Jason Lee, who had started out Daily Pay, right? And so what they're doing is they basically had allocated $20,000 for companies to give to companies who were sort of left in the lurch by this announcement. But I don't know, Cliff. I mean, I think the bigger conversation here is, as an employee and as a business leader, how much do you sort of need to prepare people that some of this stuff is as fluid as any other thing that's out on the internet, right?
Yeah. I mean, there is that. It's one of the reasons too, as you mentioned, that we brought this up, but we always include things like roadmap and some of that idea of who's appearing now in RFPs, and just trying to give a better sense of what the future for these companies can be is another part of what's going on. Another way you can sort of protect as well. But yeah, that is the nature too of, as we mentioned earlier, that certain spaces are ripe for some disruption, for some new players to come in. But then with disruptions comes, volatility, right? It's the other edge of that sword, and people can go, but always remember the effect that it can have on your employees and consider what would happen in these sort of scenarios. I think a lesson we've learned fairly well in general from the pandemic years, but a nice bearing of reminder of, how we're doing economically and effective that can have.
Yeah. So as we're wrapping up, I know we're kind of coming up on our half hour, but I really want to get to these next two topics.
Yes, I know.
Really
I know.
Ones,
I was just about to say, let me transition because this is an article that both of us just found. Well, a couple of these are just amazingly interesting. So, and again, I'll have the links, on the LinkedIn page when you see this, find these because you want to read both of these and watch this video too. One from Brian Solis called AI Insights. Now he's kind of written it all word, so I Insights. AI will be smarter than humans before 2030. So what? And then another one that's called The Innovator's Dilemma That Kills Companies. Those Clay Christensen from Harvard and various other sources kind of brought together. But let's talk about the AI one, because besides the fact that we talk about AI all the time, and in fact, in the last podcast, right, we saw some news about how often Fortune 500 companies talk about AI. So it's not just you listening, everyone's hearing this. But this was fascinating because they're talking about how fast and ubiquitous AI has become, right? Well, hardly anyone even mentioned ChatGPT, and now it's, I think, the second fastest tech company to reach 100 million users. And the idea of how is this going to affect us, and this whole idea of what does it mean? What will the effect of AI being smarter than humans really mean for us, right? So, as he said, when you read a headline like this, the generative AI will be smarter than humans. Okay, well then why does that matter? And what does it mean? And there's some great discussion in there about how, already machines can do certain things, pass certain tests, but what are their limitations? What sort of jobs will we lose to them? Because I think he tells an anecdote fairly early on about asking how many of you believe AI will take your job. And a few years ago, hardly anyone did. And then just recently, he did it, and every single hand was up saying, I think AI is going to take my job. So it's really addressing this concern, because we talk about it in our survey, don't we? We say, okay, not that many people are concerned about it, but there are still concerns around it. But those concerns are I think, founded, but it's also time to have that discussion. So let's talk about this some. Because when you and I were talking in the green room beforehand, I made the point that coming from a psych background, there's this concept of smart. When you say something like smarter, that always flags something for me, because you can't just be smarter. That's too broad. There's so many different kinds of intelligence, even within IQ tests, right? Or any other, theoretically objective measure of intelligence. You have to think about things like, is it just who can think the fastest, who has the best recall of facts, who has a better spatial recognition and can sort of sort things out? And then a topic that I definitely want to talk about with you, because we started talking about, is being the most efficient answer, is that always the right answer?
Yeah. So this is a big topic, right? And so first of all, I want to note that the article that Brian Solis is sort of writing is in response to a video that he watched of Mo Gaudat. I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, his last name, but who's the chief business officer for Google X. And I've seen a few other presentations that Mo has put on previously. He's a very easygoing, articulate person when it talks about AI, but he was giving a big presentation at the Nordic Business Forum on AI. And he was responding to sort of the idea that, he was saying that, AI is already smarter than Elon Musk if you look at the intelligence tests, right, that people can take. And that within probably 5 years or so, they're going to surpass Einstein's intelligence ranking. And then another 5 years, they'll be 1,000 times smarter and more intelligent than any human being in existence ever, right? But then he was kind of saying, but if they are smarter, his perspective, right, like Mo's was, that then they will see all the things that we are not seeing, and they will also be able to talk to each other in a way that we're not talking, and communicate in a way that we're not talking. It's like that was the conversation that was happening in this presentation that he was reacting to, right? Mm-hmm. And I do think that, one, we need to be aware of what's happening with this technology. That's just part of, everybody needs to be up and available on this. There was just a great presentation by, if you watch, the Daily Show at all at Comedy Central, right? He had on our United States chief economic, I cannot think of what her actual role is, but she's the person who sort of oversees all the consumer stuff that's happening and the monopolies and everything inside of our countries. And she was saying, even in our country, what we're trying to understand is not to control what's happening, because that would not be good for businesses, but to make sure that we are aware of it and understand it and know where it's all heading, so we can put enough guardrails around it, right? And I think everybody you're talking to is saying it's not to stop it, it's not to hide from it, it's not to be afraid of it, but you got to know where the guardrails have to be put. And I think your conversation about, what is smart, what is intelligence, and what is creativity, and how do we talk about that? One of the things that I've talked about for ages is that, yes, it may be more efficient to have someone who comes in at one shift and another person leaves immediately, and the two basically say hi and bye, and it's very efficient to get your work done that way. But what used to happen back in the day is that you would have like a half-hour overlap, and the one person would walk through and explain everything, and they were actually educating and teaching instead of just checking off a checklist and handing it to the next person. And that person learned a little bit from that person as they went into their next role. We forget that the human interaction, that the time that we have, same thing with, yes, it may be more efficient to have an artificial intelligence pull data from something, put it right into the next tool, and then give us sort of the summary of everything. But sometimes what you need to do for human beings is have them go through that learning process, have them thinking through that, because that's where the creativity comes in. And I'm not exactly sure, and I think there's going to be a lot of, back and forth quibbling on this, but that we have really calculated from an artificial intelligence perspective the loss of the human ability, because no matter how good brains are at being, or how good artificial intelligence is at connecting all the dots and being more intelligent via all the tests we have currently come up with as human beings, but our brains have so much more capability, right?
Mm.
And a lot of it we don't understand, and we don't know how connections are made or how we think. I think that's the piece that we might be losing, is basically missing out on some of that neurological stuff that we haven't gotten to the bottom of yet about the creativity in the world that we live in. And it's the risk we run, right, with all of this.
Yeah, and I'm a couple of things. I think even within that article, right, he speaks quite a bit about, as you mentioned, Elon Musk and even Sam Altman. They said the reason they're successful is not because they're smart, but because they have something else, some other indefinable characteristics. I think resilience is used quite a bit in that article. And is that something, where you learn by being set back or by being difficult, something the computer could not do and could not pick up on. I also loved your example just now of the person going around and talking. I always think back an experience I had when I finally started working in offices, and I was working with Ron Marcello. Wonderful. I want to give him a shout out. His wife, Sheila, started care.com. And so he wisely left the company I was working at to go work for her instead. But he was our manager. It was two of us. And I was trying to figure out how to use some software program. And so was my coworker. And so for me, he'd say, okay, get on and try and get it to do what you're doing. Tell me where it's not working, right? And she was furious. She was like, no, just show me how to do it. You know what I mean? I don't have time. And she wasn't wrong. That's how she learned, and then she would recall that and be able to do it. Whereas I needed to do it in order to learn it. And he was a wise enough man to be able to figure out that both of us needed different approaches. But I couldn't imagine AI doing that, saying, okay, here's two different answers for two different people. But a human can just intuit that. They can just figure out, like, okay, this person's not getting it. Here's a different way. So.
Yeah, I do think AI is going to do a lot of things for us. And I think that they might even be able to do assessments and figure things out because they can do it more quickly. But, some of the things that we as humans aren't doing and can't do. But I do think that there is some of the things in the mixture and the space and how stuff gets done that, human beings are going to probably realize after the fact that there's something missing, right? And then we'll come back to it, because we always swing the pendulum. The one thing I've learned in my so many years, that I won't count how many in the workspace, is that the pendulum always swings too far, and then it comes back, right? In almost everything that we're working on and everything that we do. And that's in our social issues, that's in our personal lives, that's in our work lives. And I think, in this case, it's going to swing pretty far, and we're going to have to bring it back eventually, right?
Exactly. And I'll wrap it up with just to mention that that's a perfect segue into this last article, which again, we'll link to, which was that innovator's dilemma that kills companies, which is, I think, in response, although it's not mentioned explicitly, to everything that's going on with Boeing, where the pendulum has swung too far to efficiency, of just trying to do things that are the cheapest or just the quickest way possible, rather than kind of more of a long term and what's best for people. And it's not just there. There's a few other companies too, where it's like, oh, we made a cheaper car for you, but then in the long term, it's not better because it breaks down. You end up having to get a new one and other parts fail, although it's cheaper initially. And so again, like you said, that pendulum swings, and it's important to be aware of it. And I think now that I've heard you say that, I think maybe that was the theme, right? As we're talking about looking at what companies are doing and being reactive versus being strategic, right? And that's how you avoid being part of that pendulum swing. And you don't want to get into a sort of an Edgar Allan Poe situation there.
Yeah, getting bowled over. I'll say, as we're talking about innovation and sometimes going too far, for any of us 70s babies, us Gen Xers out there, if you remember the Yugos, I had a dear friend who got herself the first Yugo that was out there, a paper thin car that was basically like a motorcycle with an engine and with a car wrapped around it, right?
Yeah. I think the lawnmower had more horsepower. Yeah,
it probably did. It got us to school and back, or about 6 months before it finally blew up on her. But I think that's an example of all of those things, right? You don't want to be H&R Block, but you don't want to be Yugo, so you got to find somewhere in the middle, right?
There we go.
So, all right, Cliff, this has been a good conversation, and hopefully we got people to sort of just think broadly a little bit more. My recommendation is to go out and read some of these articles. I think, we've only touched just the tip of the iceberg on these conversations, and there is no right answer here. There's only more conversation. I think that's what is really has to happen, is just more conversation, right?
Exactly. And feel free to continue that conversation publicly. Bring it up to us in LinkedIn, or if you want to make it private, you can reach out to us as well. And of course, we have programs as well where people can meet and talk about these sort of things, right?
Yeah, we're getting started, actually. By the time this goes out, it'll be our first week of our cohort program on building an adaptable HR system strategy. So if you're interested in doing that, our fall registrations will start out, I think, probably in the next few weeks. So let us know if you're interested in that, because that's just the kind of things that we're having conversations about in those cohort programs that we're building, Cliff. That's this kind of stuff that I get excited about. We enjoy doing it. And as we wrap today, we should probably also note that if you are a survey distributor, by the time this goes out, if you haven't already gotten your link to do your survey distribution, it will be going out in mid-April for everyone. But let us know, email us if you want to become one of the, I think we're up to maybe 50, 60 distributors this year already that we at least got logos for. Generally, by the time we get wrapped the year, we end up with somewhere around 80 to 100. So we are rapidly adding to our distribution list this year for the annual HR system survey. If you're an association, a consulting firm, a media outlet, magazine, an event, or even a vendor, and you want to make sure that your organizations that you're touching have a voice in the HR technology space, let us know. And then Cliff, what's the date that we're going live with the survey this year?
May 1st. So if you are interested in these topics, even if you aren't, please just take the survey. It's a huge help, and it allows us to really give some insight and depth right back to you, right? Back to the community. So when we are talking about these things, we can say, these are the things we know are trends. Here's what we can tell you about, expected lifespan of these companies, or about what's really happening about the return to work and that sort of thing. We get it by asking you. So please look for that. May 1st will be the public launch, and we are very excited. Every year we get new and more insightful comments, and I'm very excited to see what we see this year, and we'll report back to you with the big changes, but that can only happen if you help us out too.
And I know we're over already by like 15 minutes on our time zone, so please forgive us. But as you can see, Cliff and I get really excited because we've been in survey finalization the last 2 weeks. We took a lot of comments off the LinkedIn conversation that we were having around it. We took a lot of comments from people who have been emailing us about what they'd like to see next year. So it's a fun time for us. It's like kids at a candy shop. Like, how much can we fit into before we break the system? And we have broken the system before.
Yes.
Also, if you want to know more about where Cliff and I will be at, or how to download the paper, or how to access the full white paper, we have the full white paper. We also have segments, if you aren't aware of that. So if you just want to talk about payroll, or if you just want to know about talent, or if you just want to know about the time management areas, we do have those segmented out in our marketplace. So that's something that you can do if you don't want the whole paper. But go to our website as well at sapientinsights.com, and also sign up for our newsletter. That's where you're going to get all the ongoing updates and research on launches. and where we'll also be putting details on our speaking events and where we're going to be visiting and when you can participate, as we noted already. Be sure to listen also to our sister HR Huddle. HR We Have a Problem, hosted by our CEO, Terry Zipper. These huddle programs, if they are something that you value and you enjoy listening to the updates that Cliff and I talk about and the interviews that are being done by Terry, please be sure to like and support, comment on these podcasts, wherever you get your podcast at. It really helps us out and make sure that people continue to come back and listen to the work that we're doing. To stay up to date with immediate breaking HR tech news and get all the behind the scenes content, you can follow us at Sapient Insights on LinkedIn, X, and Instagram. Although Elon may not be real happy with us this week because we did talk about how much the computer is going to be smarter than he is already. So he might get banned from X. But also be sure to listen to our sister HR Huddle set I talked about. To stay up to date, be sure to follow us at sapientinsights.com, as I said. And also, as we're wrapping up today, I just want to say thank you to Cliff, who puts together all of our material, all of our information for our conversations, as well as Brand Method Media Group, who helps us produce our podcast, run by amazing founder Kelly Kelly, and our marketing team, Lisa Renko and Summer Orlano. They make all of this possible and will probably yell at me for running over today. Thanks to our listener community. We couldn't do this without you. You really make this valuable time for us. And that's it for this episode of Spilling the Tea on HR Tech. We know it's been a busy couple of minutes here that we've been talking, but we just want to say thank you again for listening. And we hope it's been just the brew you needed to start the engines running this week. We will be back in 2 weeks with another pot of boiling hot HR tech updates and insights.